I am Keisha Vance, 34 years old, and people always say that when you marry a man, you marry his family, but nobody ever warned me that the price of admission would be the soul of my daughter. By day, I am a crisis manager for Atlanta's elite handling PR nightmares for athletes and CEOs. When their worlds catch fire, I am the one who walks through the flames to carry them out. Yet the biggest crisis of my life didn't happen in a boardroom or a press conference. It started with a yellow sticky note plastered on my daughter's bedroom door. My in-laws left a note on my 12-year-old's bedroom door. "We gave your dog away. Your cousin didn't want it around. Don't make a scene." She showed it to me, crying. I didn't cry. I did this the next morning. They got a knock at the door and started screaming, before we witness how a mother turned her grief into a masterclass in revenge. I want to take a moment to welcome you. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are within the walls of our own homes, so hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth or tried to silence your voice. Your support helps us share more stories of resilience and justice. Now let's step back to the moment I drove into the Lion's Den for what was supposed to be a relaxation weekend. It was the annual Vance family reunion at the lake house, a sprawling property that my mother-in-law Lucille treated like a royal palace. My husband Jamal had begged me to go, insisting it was time to bridge the gap between me and his family. So I packed the SUV, loaded up my daughter Maya, and our gentle giant of a dog, Duke. He is a Cane Corso mix who looks intimidating to strangers but sleeps with a teddy bear and wouldn't hurt a fly. We pulled up to the estate, gravel crunching under our tires, and the judgment started before the engine even cut off. Standing on the porch was Ashley, my brother-in-law, Trey's wife. She is the type of woman who wears white linen to a barbecue and never gets a stain. Wrinkled her nose the second the car door opened and Duke hopped out to stretch his legs. "Ew," she said, her voice carrying that fake sweetness that sets my teeth on edge. "That beast is huge. Connor is terrified of dogs. Do not bring that thing into the main house." Then Lucille stepped out, wiping her hands on a silk handkerchief. She didn't look at me or my daughter. She looked straight at Jamal. "Tie it up in the old shed out back," she commanded. "This is an upscale gathering. Jamal, not a kennel, and I certainly won't have it shedding on the imported rugs." I felt the heat rising in my chest. The shed was a dilapidated shack filled with rusty tools and spiders. It was no place for a family pet. I turned to my husband, waiting for him to defend us, waiting for him to say that Duke was harmless and part of our family. Instead, Jamal let out a long sigh, the sound of a man who had been folding under his mother's pressure for 34 years. "Just do it, Keisha," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. "Let's just keep the peace for once. Mom's blood pressure is already up and we just got here." I looked at Maya, who was clutching Duke's collar, her eyes wide with fear and disappointment. "Fine," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. I walked Duke to the shed, my expensive heels sinking into the mud while Ashley and Lucille watched from the porch with satisfied smirks. They thought they had put me in my place, but they had no idea they had just started a war they couldn't possibly afford. The humidity in Georgia hung heavy in the air that afternoon, clinging to my skin the moment I stepped out of our SUV. But the atmosphere outside the car was nothing compared to the suffocating tension inside it for the last hour of our drive. Jamal had been gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles had turned the color of ash. He was sweating, tapping the dashboard and rehearsing his lines like an actor preparing for a show. He knew he was going to bomb. "Just remember Keisha," he had said, avoiding my gaze as we turned onto the gravel driveway of the lake house. "Mom has been under a lot of stress lately with the estate planning and Trey's promotion. Let's just try to be agreeable. Okay, I need this weekend to go smoothly." I had nodded silently, biting my tongue. I wanted to remind him that I was the one who paid the mortgage on our home in Buckhead, that I was the one who had just negotiated a 7-figure settlement for a client, and that I didn't need lessons on how to be agreeable from a man who still let his mother buy his underwear until he was 30. But I kept quiet. For Maya's sake, my daughter was in the back seat humming along to the radio, one hand buried in the thick fur of Duke, our Cane Corso mix. Duke was a rescue, 100 pounds of muscle and devotion, who slept at the foot of Maya's bed every single night. He was family. But as we pulled up to the main house, I saw the welcome committee, and my stomach dropped. Ashley was standing on the wraparound porch looking like she had stepped out of a catalog for Southern living. She was wearing a pristine white linen dress that would have been stained within 5 minutes on anyone else but on her. It remained impossibly crisp. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail that pulled her features into a permanent expression of surprise and judgment. Beside her stood my brother-in-law Trey, holding a glass of iced tea, looking like the lord of the manor, despite the fact that he hadn't held down a job for longer than 6 months until this recent promotion. Jamal killed the engine and forced a smile that looked painful. "Showtime," he muttered. We stepped out, and before I could even get a hello out of my mouth, the back door opened, and Duke hopped out, stretching his long legs and letting out a low, happy woof at the smell of the lake water. Ashley recoiled, as if she had just seen a radioactive monster. She actually took a step back, clutching her pearls in a gesture so cliché, I almost laughed. "Ew," she shrieked her voice piercing the humid air. "Jamal, what is that thing doing here?" "It is a dog, Ashley," I said, keeping my voice level as I walked around to grab our bags. "His name is Duke, and he is part of our family." Ashley wrinkled her nose, looking at Duke like he was a giant rat. "Connor is terrified of dogs," she said, referring to her 7-year-old son who is currently nowhere in sight. "And frankly, that thing looks dangerous. It is huge. Look at its jaws. I cannot believe you brought a beast like that around." "My child Duke is a therapy dog," I countered, fighting the urge to roll my eyes. "He is certified. He sits with children at the library for reading hour. He is probably better behaved than most of the adults here." Then the screen door creaked open, and the matriarch herself stepped out. Lucille Vance looked impeccable as always, in a floral blouse and tailored slacks. She didn't look at me or her granddaughter first. Her eyes went straight to the dog, and then to her son, her face hardening into a mask of disappointment. "Jamal," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I thought I made it clear this was an upscale gathering. We are having the bishop over for dinner tomorrow night. This is a family reunion, not a barnyard. Get that animal out of my sight." "Hello to you too, Lucille," I said, stepping forward. Maya moved closer to me, sensing the hostility, her hand tightening on Duke's leash. Lucille finally flicked her gaze toward me, her eyes scanning my outfit, looking for a loose thread or a wrinkle she could criticize when she found none. She simply pursed her lips. "Keisha," she said, as if my name was a bad taste in her mouth. "There is a shed behind the old carriage house. You can tie him up there." "The shed," I repeated, blinking in disbelief. "Lucille, that sheet hasn't been used in 20 years. It is full of rust and mold. It is 90 degrees out here. I am not leaving my dog in a tin box in this heat. He is house-trained. He can sleep in our room in his crate." "Absolutely not," Lucille snapped. "We just had the carpets deep cleaned. And Ashley says Connor is scared I will not have my grandson traumatized because you insist on dragging your pets everywhere, tie him up in the shed or take him to a kennel in town, although I doubt anyone has availability on such short notice." I felt the familiar fire rising in my chest. This wasn't about the dog. This was about control. It was about Lucille reminding me that no matter how successful I was in Atlanta, here at the lake house, I was still the outsider, the girl from the wrong side of the tracks who trapped her precious son. I turned to Jamal, waiting for him to step up, waiting for him to say, "Mom, that is ridiculous. Duke stays with us or we leave." I looked at him, willing him to be the man I knew he could be, the man who was a loving father to Maya and a partner to me. But Jamal wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked at his mother, clutching her chest slightly, as if the mere presence of the dog was inducing cardiac arrest. Then he looked at Ashley, who was shaking her head with exaggerated fear finally. He looked at the ground, kicking at a piece of gravel with his expensive loafer. "Keisha, come on," he said, his voice soft and pleading. "Just do it. Okay, Mom has been having issues with her blood pressure lately. We don't want to cause a scene the minute we get here. Just put him in the shed for now. We can figure something else out later." I stared at my husband, seeing him clearly. In that moment, He wasn't my partner. He was Lucille's son, a little boy, afraid of Mommy's disapproval. The betrayal stung worse than the heat. Maya tugged on my sleeve, tears welling up in her big brown eyes. Mom, no, we can't leave Duke in the shed. He hates the dark. You promised he could swim in the lake. I knelt down in the dirt, ignoring the stain it would leave on my pants, and cupped my daughter's face. Listen to me, Maya, I whispered, so only she could hear. I know this is unfair. I know it is wrong, but we are going to be the bigger people today. I need you to be brave for Duke, okay? I promise I will go. I promise I. Check on him every single hour. I will take him for walks and I won't let him get lonely. But right now, we have to do this, so your dad doesn't have a heart attack. Maya sniffled and nodded, wiping her eyes. She trusted me. She believed that I could fix anything, because that is what I did for a living. I fixed problems. But as I took the leash from her hand and began the long walk toward the dilapidated shed at the back of the property, I knew this was one problem I couldn't just negotiate away. The shed was worse than I remembered. The wood was rotting, and the air inside smelled of mildew and gasoline. Spiderwebs hung thick in the corners. Duke whined low in his throat, looking up at me with confused eyes as I tied his leash to a support beam, making sure he had enough room to lie down, but not enough to hurt himself. I am so sorry, boy, I whispered, stroking his velvet ears. I am so sorry I let them do this to you. I left the shed door cracked for air, but propped it so he couldn't escape walking back. To the main house, I could hear laughter. Ashley and Lucille were on the porch, clinking glasses of iced tea, celebrating their first victory of the weekend. Jamal was sitting with them, laughing a little too loud, trying to buy his way back into their good graces. I paused at the edge of the lawn, watching them, my heart hardening into something cold and sharp. They thought they had won. They thought by banishing my dog to the dirt, they had put me in the dirt too, but they had made a fatal mistake. They assumed that, because I was silent, I was defeated. They didn't know that in my line of work, silence isn't surrender. Silence is just the time you spend loading the weapon. The dining room at the lake house was designed to make you feel small. The ceilings were vaulted, soaring 20 feet high with a crystal chandelier that looked like it belonged in the Titanic, hovering ominously over the mahogany table. The walls were covered in dark damask wallpaper that seemed to absorb the light and the air. Conditioning was cranked down to a temperature that I am sure Lucille thought preserved her youth, but just made the rest of us shiver in our seats. We took our assigned places like actors hitting our marks. Lucille sat at the head of the table, naturally with Trey to her right, and Ashley beside him. The golden couple bathed in the warm glow of the sconces. Jamal and I were seated on the opposite side, the left side, the side for the afterthoughts and the mistakes. Even the table setting felt aggressive. Heavy silver forks that weighed a pound each, and crystal goblets that looked too fragile to touch. Dinner was a somber affair of roast beef and silence until Ashley decided to break it. She didn't just speak, she performed. She was twirling a forkful of meat, gesturing wildly as if conducting an orchestra of her own importance. So, Trey finally sat down with the board today. She announced, her voice pitching up an octave in excitement, and they basically begged him to take the senior VP role honestly. It was embarrassing how much they want him. They said he is the only one with the vision to lead the division into the next quarter. I took a sip of water, fighting the urge to choke. We all knew the truth. Trey's vision consisted of playing 18 holes of golf and taking credit for his subordinates' spreadsheets. His new boss was his fraternity brother's father, a man who owed the Vance family a favor from way back. But to hear Ashley tell it, Trey was a corporate savant. Lucille beamed, her face softening into a look of pure maternal rapture that she reserved exclusively for her eldest son. Well, it is no surprise to me, she purred, leaning forward, her pearls clicking against the edge of the table. Trey has always had natural leadership qualities. It is in the blood, darling. You cannot teach that kind of executive presence. You're either born with it or you aren't. Trey sat back in his chair, looking smug, swirling his red wine like a Bond villain. Yeah, well, someone has to steer the ship, he said, shooting a glance at Jamal, who was busy pushing his peas around his plate like a scolded child. I just told them I need total autonomy if I am going to fix the mess the last guy left. Jamal shrank lower in his seat, shrinking away from the comparison. His brother was the VP, and Jamal was the disappointment, the one who married me, the one who didn't quite fit the mold. And Ashley. Lucille continued, turning her adoration toward her daughter-in-law. You are going to be the perfect executive wife. You have such grace. Dear, really, it is so refreshing to see young women who still value tradition and etiquette. So many girls today are just loud and aggressive, trying to be men instead of supporting their husbands. You are a model for what a Vance woman should be. The insult landed softly, but it cut deep. Ashley was the model, white, polished and deferential. I was, the warning, loud, aggressive and black. The woman who worked, the woman who spoke her mind, the woman who didn't need a man to define her worth. Lucille didn't have to say my name for everyone at the table to know exactly who she was talking about. Ashley preened under the praise, touching her hair lightly. Oh, thank you, Lucille. I just think it is so important to maintain standards. You know, especially in our circles. Appearances are everything. I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. Appearances were everything to them. The right clothes, the right country club, the right skin tone. Meanwhile, I was paying the bills that kept their appearances afloat, but that didn't matter here. Then Lucille decided she hadn't drawn enough blood yet. She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto me with a predatory gleam. She took a delicate bite of her asparagus, chewed slowly, and then smiled. A smile that didn't reach her eyes. Speaking of work, Keisha, how is your little job going? She asked, the word job dripping with condescension, still running around, cleaning up messes for those people. The table went quiet. Even Ashley stopped chewing those people the code. Word was so loud it practically echoed off the vaulted ceiling. I placed my knife and fork down on the edge of my plate, trying to keep my hands steady. Actually, Lucille business is booming. My firm has expanded. We are taking on international clients now. Lucille waved her hand dismissively, blowing my accomplishment away like smoke. Oh, I heard about that rapper who got arrested for assault last week. Is that who you are representing now? I honestly don't know how you stomach it, Keisha, spending your days with criminals and thugs, trying to spin their violence into something palatable. It must be so draining, dealing with that kind of trash all day, basically being a glorified janitor for the gutter. I felt the heat rush up my neck. It wasn't just an insult to me. It was an insult to my entire career, to the empire I had built from scratch, while her son was still asking for an allowance. I looked at Jamal, waiting for him to say something. Anything to say. Mom, Keisha represents Fortune 500 CEOs, Mom. Keisha is the most respected crisis manager in the city, but he just kept cutting his meat, sawing back and forth, his eyes fixed on the porcelain. I took a deep breath, channeling the ice that ran through this house. Actually, Lucille, the client you are referring to isn't mine, I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. My firm just closed a contract this morning with the CEO of Technova. I spent the last week negotiating a merger that saved 3,000 jobs in Atlanta. The retainer alone is worth $2 million, and the performance bonus is another $500,000. I don't deal with trash. I deal with power. I let the numbers hang in the air. $2 million. It was more money than Trey would see in a decade. Even with his nepotism job, it was enough to buy this lake house twice over. I looked around the table, waiting for the shock, waiting for the respect. I waited for Ashley to gasp. I waited for Trey to look jealous. I waited for Jamal to look proud, but there was nothing. Lucille stared at me for 3 agonizing seconds, her expression completely blank, as if I had just spoken in static. She didn't blink. She didn't frown. She simply deleted the information from her brain because it didn't fit her narrative. Keisha, the failure. Keisha, the charity case. That was the only version of me she allowed to exist. She didn't even acknowledge that I had spoken. She just turned her head back to Ashley as if I were a ghost. Anyway, darling, she said, her voice bright and cheery again. Tell me about the drapes for Trey's. New office, are we thinking silk or velvet? I feel like velvet sends such a stronger message of authority. Do not you think? Oh, definitely velvet. Ashley squealed, clapping her hands together. Silk is just so played out and velvet is so regal. Jamal finally looked up, a weak smile plastered on his face. Yeah, velvet. Sounds cool, he said, desperate to join the conversation, desperate to be part of the club. I sat there frozen, my $1,000,000 victory dissolving. Into the cold air of the dining room, they hadn't just insulted me. They had erased me in their world. My success didn't count. My money didn't matter. My voice didn't exist. I looked down at my cold roast beef and realized the truth. I wasn't a guest at this table. I was a prop. I was the background noise to their delusions of grandeur, and in that moment, as they debated fabric swatches while ignoring the woman who could buy and sell them all, I realized that playing nice wasn't going to work anymore. You cannot reason with people who refuse to see you. You can only show them, and I was about to show them everything. The sun rose on Sunday morning with a deceptively gentle light filtering through the sheer curtains of the guest room, but the peace was shattered before I could even finish my first cup of coffee. Jamal came rushing into the room, his phone in hand, looking frantic. "Babe, your assistant just texted me," he said breathless. "He says the server is down at the office and he can't reach you because the reception out here is dead. You need to call him right now. It sounds like a level 1 emergency." I sat up, adrenaline instantly flooding my system. A server crash could mean leaked data for my clients. It could mean millions of dollars in damages. I grabbed my phone, checking the bars, 0 service, just like Lucille intended when she picked this location. "I have to go," I said, scrambling out of bed. "I need to get to town to get a signal." Jamal nodded eagerly, too eagerly, handing me my keys. "Yeah, go. Just go drive into town. Grab a coffee and handle it. Take your time, babe. I will watch Maya. We will be fine. Just go save the world." I didn't question him. I didn't question the urgency, or why my assistant hadn't tried the landline I just threw on a sundress and sprinted to the car, leaving my daughter and my dog behind in a house full of vipers. I drove the 15 miles to the nearest town, my mind racing with damage control strategies. But when I finally reached the coffee shop and dialed my assistant's number, he picked up on the first ring, sounding completely confused. "Server crash?" he asked, laughing. "Keisha, the servers are fine. I am literally looking at the dashboard right now. Everything is green. Who told you we were crashing?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "Jamal," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. It wasn't a crisis. It was a decoy. I hung up and ran back to the car, my heart hammering against my ribs, a sick feeling uncurling in my stomach like a poisonous snake. He wanted me out of the house. Why? Why did he need me gone for 2 hours on a Sunday morning? I drove back faster than the speed limit allowed, the tires screeching as I turned onto the gravel driveway of the lake house. The estate was quiet. Too quiet. The birds were singing. The lake was lapping against the shore, but the silence from the house felt heavy and suffocating. I burst through the front door, expecting smoke, expecting a fire, expecting an ambulance. Instead, I found stillness. "Maya," I called out, my voice echoing in the grand foyer. "Maya, where are you?" No answer. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my breath catching in my throat. I ran down the hallway toward the guest room where Maya and I were staying. The door was closed. "Maya, baby, are you in there?" I heard a small sound, a stifled sob that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. I pushed the door open, but it was locked from the inside. Maya opened the door. "It is Mommy." The lock clicked and the door creaked open, revealing my 12-year-old daughter sitting on the floor, her knees pulled up to her chest, her face buried in her hands. She was shaking, trembling so violently that her teeth were chattering, but she wasn't making a sound. She was crying silently, the way people do when they are too terrified to be heard. "Maya, what happened?" I dropped to my knees, pulling her into my arms, scanning her for injuries. "Are you hurt? Tell me what happened. Baby, where is your dad?" She didn't speak. She just uncurled one fist, revealing a crumpled piece of yellow sticky note, damp with her sweat and tears. I took it, smoothing it out on my knee. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, aggressive, written with a thick black marker. "We gave your dog away," the note read. "Connor didn't want it around. Do not make a scene if you want what is best for your dad." The world stopped spinning. The air left the room, sucking the oxygen out of my lungs, gave him away like he was an old couch, like he was trash. Duke, my gentle giant who slept at the foot of Maya's bed, who licked her tears when she had a bad day, who was the only source of unconditional love in this God-forsaken house. I looked at Maya. Her eyes were red and swollen, terror etched into every feature. They took him. Mom, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Uncle Trey came with a man in a truck. They dragged him out. He was crying. Mom, Duke was crying, and Dad just stood there. Dad just stood there. Those 4 words shattered. Whatever was left of my marriage, Jamal stood there. He stood. Watched them drag our family member away, and he did nothing. He sent me on a fool's errand, so he wouldn't have to hear me scream. Rage is a funny thing. Usually it is hot, it is fiery, it makes you want to yell and throw things. But this wasn't rage. This was something older, something darker. It was cold. It started in my toes and froze my veins, turning my blood into ice. I stood up, the sticky note clutched in my hand. "Stay here, Maya," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Calm, lethal lock. The door. Do not open it for anyone but me. Do you understand? She nodded, terrified eyes wide. I walked out of the room and down the stairs, my bare feet making no sound on the expensive hardwood floors. I could hear them now, the clinking of china, the murmur of polite conversation coming from the sunroom. I walked to the doorway and stood there watching them, a tableau of privilege and cruelty. Lucille was pouring tea from a silver pot, her pinky finger extended delicately. Ashley was laughing at us. Something, Trey said, her head thrown back, exposing her pale throat. Trey was leaning back in his chair, looking satisfied, a man who had finally exerted some power. Jamal was there too, sitting on the edge of the sofa, staring into his cup, looking like a man waiting for the executioner. "Duke," I said the single word, cutting through their laughter like a blade. The room went silent. Ashley's laugh cut off abruptly. Lucille set the teapot down with a sharp clink. Trey looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. Jamal didn't move. He didn't look up. He just hunched his shoulders closer together. "Where is he?" I asked, walking into the room, my voice devoid of emotion. Ashley was the first to speak. She smoothed her white linen dress and offered me a pitying smile. "Oh, you are back early, Keisha. We didn't expect you for another hour." "Where is my dog, Ashley?" She sighed, looking at Trey as if to say, "See, I told you she would be dramatic." "Look, Keisha," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We had to make an executive decision. Animal control came by while you were gone. Apparently, someone reported a dangerous animal on the property." "Someone reported it," I repeated. "Yes. Well, the officer took one look at that beast and said it was a liability." Ashley continued picking a piece of lint off her skirt. "And honestly, Connor was petrified. The poor boy wouldn't even come out of his room. Trey had to think of the children." I turned my gaze to Trey, my brother-in-law, the man who had never worked a hard day in his life, sitting there like he was the king of the castle. "You called animal control?" I asked. Trey shrugged, taking a sip of his iced tea. "Look, Keisha, it is a violent breed. Everyone knows that. I did it for general safety. We can't have a monster like that running around. When the bishop comes for dinner, it is just a dog. You can get another one, a poodle, maybe something that fits the aesthetic better. Fits the aesthetic, he murdered my dog because he didn't match the furniture." I looked at Lucille. Surely as a mother, she would understand. Surely she would see the cruelty of taking a child's pet away. Lucille took a sip of her tea, her eyes cold over the rim of the cup. "It is done, Keisha," she said dismissively. "Do not make a scene. We are having a lovely afternoon and I won't have you ruining it with your theatrics. Besides, it taught Maya a valuable lesson about resilience. Not everything in life is permanent. A valuable lesson. She traumatized my child to teach her a lesson." Finally, I looked at Jamal, my husband, the father of my child, the man who swore to protect us. "And you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You let them do this." Jamal finally looked up. His eyes were wet, pleading, begging me to understand, begging me not to blow up his spot in front of his mommy. "Keisha, look," he stammered, his voice shaking. Mom was really stressed, and Ashley was freaking out about Connor. I think it is for the best, you know. Mom has fewer headaches this way, and we can buy Maya a pony or something, right? Just wanted to keep the peace. Babe, please understand. He wanted to keep the peace. He traded our dog, our family, for a quiet afternoon with his mother. He sacrificed his daughter's heart to make his sister-in-law comfortable. I looked at him, and I saw a stranger. I didn't see the man I married. I saw a coward, a weak, pathetic little boy who would burn his own house down if his mother handed him the matches. I stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching thin and tight like a rubber band about to snap. They were all watching me, waiting for the explosion. They wanted me to scream. They wanted me to throw a vase to curse, to act like the angry black woman they all believed I was. They wanted a reason to kick me out, to point at me and say, "See, she is crazy. She doesn't belong here." Ashley was smirking, ready to dial security. Lucille was clutching her pearls, ready to faint. Trey was puffing out his chest, ready to be the hero. But I didn't give them what they wanted. I looked down at the sticky note in my hand. Then I looked at Jamal and I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile a shark gives before it drags you under. "Okay," I said. The word hung in the air, confusing them. Ashley blinked, her smirk faltering. "Okay?" Trey asked, suspicious. I nodded, smoothing my dress. "General safety. You are right. We can't have dangerous elements in the house. Safety is the priority." Jamal let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, his shoulders sagging in relief. "Thank you, babe," he breathed. "Thank you for being reasonable." I looked at him one last time, memorizing the face of the man who just betrayed me, because I knew I would never see him the same way again. "I am always reasonable, Jamal," I said, turning my back on them. "Enjoy your tea." I walked out of the room, my steps measured and calm. I didn't run. I didn't slam the door. I walked up the stairs, past the family portraits of smiling Vances, past the expensive art, past the lies and the pretense. I went back to the guest room and locked the door. Behind me, Maya looked up from the floor, her eyes wide with hope. "Did you find him?" she asked. I knelt down and pulled her into my arms, holding her tight so she wouldn't see my face. "No, baby," I whispered. "Not yet, but I promise you, I am going to fix this." I wiped her tears and stood up, moving to the desk. I opened my laptop, the screen glowing blue in the dim room. I didn't open Google to search for animal control. I didn't look for local shelters. I opened my secure contacts list, the one I kept for my highest level clients, the one with the numbers of people who could find anything anywhere and destroy anyone. I typed in a name, Marcus, the private investigator. He owed me a favor from the senator's scandal last year, find out where a dog was taken from the Vance estate in the last 2 hours. I typed license plate lookup on a gray truck, find him, Marcus Price is no object. Then I opened a second window and typed in another name, Samantha, the financial shark, my forensic accountant. I need a full asset search on Lucille Vance, Trey Vance and Ashley Vance. I wrote look for liens, debts, unpaid taxes, and hidden transfers. I want to know who really owns that lake house, and I want to know it by tonight. I hit send and sat back, the coldness in my veins turning into focus. They took my dog, thinking it would break me. They thought I was just a wife, just a guest, just a nuisance. They forgot who I am. I am the cleaner, I am the fixer, and they just made themselves the mess. I looked at Maya, who had curled up on the bed, clutching Duke's favorite teddy bear. "Don't worry, baby," I said softly, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "Mom is working." Downstairs, I could hear them laughing again, the sound of clinking glass and self-congratulation. They were celebrating their victory. They thought the problem was solved. But the problem was just getting started. Because while they were drinking iced tea and patting themselves on the back, I was buying their debts. I wasn't going to get mad. I was going to get everything. The vibration of my phone on the mahogany desk sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I grabbed it before the second buzz. It was Marcus, my private investigator. I found the truck. His voice was gravelly, devoid of the usual charm he used on clients. Keisha, you are not going to like this. It wasn't animal control. There is no record of a pickup at the Vance estate today. The truck belongs to a guy named Cletus, a local heavy drinker who does odd jobs for cash off the books. I pulled the security footage from the gate camera. Trey handed him a wad of cash. Keisha, $500, $500. My brother-in-law paid a drunk $500 to murder my daughter's best friend and dump him somewhere like trash. Where is he? Marcus, my voice was so cold it burned my throat. I tracked the truck's GPS. He drove out to the old logging road off Route 9. It is a dumping ground. Keisha, people leave old appliances out there. Sometimes. Other things, send me the coordinates. Sent and Keisha, be careful. Cletus isn't exactly stable. I hung up and looked at Maya, who was watching me from the bed, her eyes swollen almost shut. Mom, she whispered. I know where he is, I said, grabbing my keys. I am going to get him. You stay here. Do not unlock this door for anyone, not your dad, not your grandmother. If they knock, you put your headphones on and pretend you are asleep. Do you understand? She nodded, clutching the pillow. Bring him home, Mom. I will. I slipped out the side door, avoiding the sunroom where the laughter was still echoing. I got into my car, not the SUV we came in, but the rental I had insisted on getting, just in case Jamal needed the family car. Always have an exit strategy. That was rule number 1 of crisis management. I tore out of the driveway. Gravel spraying behind me. I drove like a woman possessed, ignoring speed limits, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The GPS led me away from the manicured lawns of the lakefront properties deeper into the woods, where the trees grew thick and the roads turned to dirt. Trey lied. He looked me in the eye and lied about animal control. He didn't just want the dog gone. He wanted it done cheaply and quietly. He didn't care if Duke suffered. He didn't care that Duke was a living, breathing creature who felt fear to Trey. Duke was just an inconvenience that clashed with his wife's linen dress. I turned onto the logging road. It was barely a path overgrown with weeds and littered with trash, old tires, rusted washing machines, bags of garbage. This was where things went to be forgotten. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Please be alive, please be alive. I saw the truck first. It was a rusted-out pickup parked near a ravine. A man was leaning against the hood, taking a swig from a brown paper bag. Cletus! I didn't stop to think. I slammed the car into park and jumped out, leaving the door open. Where is the dog? I screamed, marching toward him. Cletus jumped, nearly dropping his bottle. He looked at me with bleary eyes swaying slightly. Who the hell are you? I am the woman who is going to ruin your life if you do not tell me where my dog is right now. I advanced on him, not caring that I was wearing a sundress and sandals in the middle of a garbage dump. The dog Trey Vance paid you to take. Where is he? Cletus blinked, processing the name. He pointed a shaking finger toward the tree line. Over there, he was making too much noise. Tied him up, was going to deal with it later. I didn't wait for him to finish. I ran toward the trees. Duke! I yelled. Duke! A low whine answered me. I pushed through the brush, thorns tearing at my legs. I didn't feel it. I saw him. Duke was tied to a thick oak tree with a piece of rough rope that was cut into his neck. He was cowering against the bark, trembling violently when he saw me. His ears perked up, and he let out a sound that was half bark, half sob. Oh, baby. I fell to my knees in the dirt, my hands fumbling with the knots. I am here. Mommy is here. He licked my face frantically, his tail thumping weakly against the ground. He wasn't dead. He wasn't bleeding, but he was terrified. The rope was tied so tight he could barely move his head. I couldn't untie it. The knots were too tight and wet. Hold on, I told him. Hold on. I ran back to the car and grabbed the emergency kit from the trunk. I pulled out a pair of trauma shears. Cletus was watching me, looking confused and a little scared. You stay right there, I warned him. Do not move. I ran back to Duke and cut the rope as soon as he was free. He tackled me, burying his heavy head in my chest. I hugged him, burying my face in his fur, smelling the dirt and the fear and the distinct scent of my dog. He was alive. Trey hadn't won. Come on, I said, hooking his leash onto his collar. Let's go. I walked him back to the car, stopping in front of Cletus. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of him, his truck and his license plate. Hey, he protested. You tell Trey Vance the job is done. I said, my voice steady and cold. If you tell him I was here, if you tell him the dog is alive, I will give these photos to the police and tell them I saw you dumping toxic waste out here. Do you understand me? You take his money and you keep your mouth shut. Cletus nodded rapidly, backing away. I didn't want to hurt no dog, lady. I just needed the cash. Get out of here. I loaded Duke into the back seat of the rental. He curled up immediately, exhausted. I got into the driver's seat and locked the doors. My hands were shaking now. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, simmering fury. Trey had paid a hitman for my dog. Ashley had laughed about it. Lucille had sanctioned it, and Jamal. Jamal had distracted me so they could do it. They were monsters, all of them. I didn't drive back to the lake house, not yet. I drove into the next town over to the ritzy pet hotel and spa that my wealthy clients used for their poodles and French bulldogs. It was called the Gilded Leash. I walked in looking disheveled with dirt on my knees and a 100-pound dog at my side. The receptionist looked up, ready to turn me away until I pulled out my black American Express card and slapped it on the counter. I need your best suite for Duke, I said indefinitely. He needs a bath, a vet checkup, the gourmet meal plan, and 24-hour monitoring. And most importantly, I need absolute discretion. If anyone asks, this dog is not here. His name is not on your register. He is a ghost. Do you understand? The receptionist looked at the card, then at my face. She saw the look in my eyes, the look of a woman who was done playing games. Of course, ma'am, she typed rapidly. We will take excellent care of him. Private suite, no visitors. I hugged Duke one last time, whispering promises into his ear. You are safe here. I will come back for you. I promise, just a few more days. Leaving him there was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I couldn't bring him back to the lake house. If they knew he was alive, they would just try again, and next time they wouldn't hire a drunk. They would make sure it was permanent. I got back into my car. It was time to go back. Time to put the mask on. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was a mess. My eyes were wild. I took a deep breath, inhale, exhale. I reached into my purse and pulled out my makeup bag. I reapplied my lipstick. I fixed my hair. I wiped the dirt off my legs with a wet wipe. I wasn't Keisha, the heartbroken dog owner, anymore. I was Keisha Vance, the crisis manager, and I was walking into a hostile negotiation. The drive back to the lake house took 30 minutes. 30 minutes to compose myself. 30 minutes to bury my rage so deep that it wouldn't show on my face. 30 minutes to plan my next move. When I pulled into the driveway, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. The house looked beautiful, glowing with warm light. It looked like a home, but it was a trap. I walked through the front door. The house was quiet again. I found them in the living room. They had moved on from tea to wine. A bottle of expensive Cabernet was open on the coffee table. Ashley was flipping through a magazine. Trey was scrolling on his phone. Lucille was adjusting a flower arrangement. Jamal was staring out the window, a glass of wine in his hand. They all looked up when I entered. The tension in the room spiked. They were waiting for the grieving widow. They were waiting for the hysterical black woman to start screaming so they could call the police and have me removed. They wanted me to be the villain. I walked into the center of the room. I didn't look at Jamal. I looked at Lucille. Well, she asked, her voice sharp, did you handle your little work crisis? Yes, I lied smoothly. It is handled. Server is back up. Crisis averted. And Ashley asked, putting down her magazine. She was fishing. She wanted me to bring up the dog. She wanted to see me bleed. Did you check on Maya? She has been locked in that room for hours. Honestly, Keisha, you really should teach her not to sulk. It is very unbecoming. I dug my nails into my palms so hard I felt skin break. I forced the corners of my mouth up into a smile, a tight, polite, dead smile. I will go check on her in a minute, I said. I just wanted to apologize. The room went dead silent. Trey lowered his phone. Jamal turned around from the window, his mouth hanging open. Apologize, Lucille repeated, arching a sculpted eyebrow. Yes, I said, my voice steady. I reacted poorly earlier. I was emotional. I realize now that you were right. Ashley blinked. We were. Yes, I continued, walking over to the bar cart and pouring myself a glass of water because I didn't trust myself with a weapon like a wine bottle in my hand. This is a family reunion. It is a time for celebration. Duke was just a dog, and if he was a danger to Connor or a nuisance to Lucille, then you did what you had to do, safety first, right? Trey. Trey looked confused, then smug. He puffed out his chest. Exactly. I am glad you see it that way, Keisha. I really did it for everyone's good. Of course, I said, taking a sip of water I should have listened to. Jamal, he told me it would be better this way, less stress for everyone. I glanced at Jamal. He looked like he was about to vomit. He knew me. He knew I loved that dog more than I loved most people. He knew this surrender was unnatural, but he was too relieved to question it. He saw an out, and he took it. Yeah, Jamal croaked. Yeah, exactly. I am glad you are being reasonable, babe. Lucille clapped her hands together lightly, a sound like dry twigs snapping. Well, isn't this refreshing? I must admit, Keisha, I expected a tantrum. It is nice to see you finally learning some Vance family values. Composure is everything. Composure, I echoed. Yes, you are absolutely right, Lucille. I knew you were a smart girl, Lucille said, bestowing a benevolent smile upon me, like I was a peasant who had just learned to curtsy. Now, why don't you go get cleaned up for dinner? We are ordering catering from that Italian place in town to celebrate Trey's promotion properly. That sounds lovely, I said. I will just go check on Maya first. Explain things to her. Do that, Ashley chimed in. Tell her we can get her a goldfish or maybe a hamster, something that lives in a cage. Something that lives in a cage like me. That is what they thought. They thought they had put me in a cage. They thought they had broken my spirit and forced me to submit to their rules. I will tell her, I said. I turned and walked out of the room. I felt their eyes on my back. I felt their triumph. They were probably toasting right now, toasting to the fact that they had won that. They had gotten rid of the dog and put the upstart daughter-in-law in her place. I walked up the stairs, my legs feeling heavy. Every step took effort. But as I reached the landing, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I had a text from Marcus. Found more than just the dog. Keisha, check your email. The lake house isn't the only thing dirty in this family. I stopped outside the guest room door. I didn't go in yet. I checked my email. There was a PDF attachment. I opened it. It was a property deed. History. And below that, a tax lien notice. I read the first few lines and a smile spread across my face. A real smile this time. Not the fake one I had worn downstairs. This was the smile of the executioner. They thought the dog was the conflict. They thought eliminating Duke was the end of the story. They had no idea the dog was just the trigger. I put my phone away and opened the bedroom door. Maya looked up from the bed, her eyes red. Mom, she whispered. I walked over and sat on the bed. I pulled her close. Duke is safe, I whispered into her hair. He is at the spa. He is eating steak and sleeping on a memory foam mattress. Maya sobbed, her whole body relaxing. Really, but you have to listen to me. Maya, this is the most important acting job of your life. They cannot know. We have to pretend he is gone. We have to pretend we are sad, but we are moving on. Can you do that for me? She pulled back, wiping her nose. Her eyes were fierce for Duke. For Duke and for us, I can do it. Good, I said, smoothing. I said. Her hair. Because downstairs they think they won. They think they broke us, but they just handed us the keys to the kingdom. What are we going to do, Mom? We are going to have dinner, I said, standing up. We are going to eat their food and drink their wine and smile at their jokes, and while they are celebrating, I am going to buy the roof out from over their heads. I walked to the window and looked out at the lake. The sun had set and the water was dark, and still it looked peaceful. But beneath the surface there were currents, strong, dangerous currents that could pull you under if you weren't careful. Lucille Vance had started a war over a dog. She was about to lose her empire because of it. The silence in the lake house was heavy after the caravan of SUVs crunched down the gravel driveway, taking the Vance family to their exclusive golf outing. They hadn't invited me. Of course, Lucille had made a point of saying over breakfast that the club had a strict members-only policy and guest passes were just so difficult to come by on short notice. She had said it with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes, buttering her toast while Ashley talked about her new tennis bracelet. Jamal had looked at his eggs and mumbled something about maybe staying behind with me, but Lucille had cut him off immediately, saying, "Don't be ridiculous. Jamal, your brother needs a partner besides Keisha, probably has work to do." So they left, leaving me alone in the sprawling estate that I was currently paying the electric bill for. I waited until the dust from their tires settled. Then I moved. I didn't go to the guest room to sulk. I went straight to the library, the one room in the house that Lucille treated like the Oval Office forbidden territory for everyone except her and Trey. I needed a cover story just in case the housekeeper walked in, or they came back early. I decided on car insurance. I would say I needed to find the policy for the SUV because I thought I saw a scratch. Purely innocent. Purely helpful. I pushed open the heavy oak doors. The library smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and entitlement. The walls were lined with books that nobody in this family had ever read. Leather-bound volumes bought by the yard to look sophisticated. I went straight to the massive mahogany desk in the center of the room. It was cluttered with papers organized in neat stacks. Lucille was meticulous about her image, but chaotic about her administration. I started shifting through the piles quickly, carefully keeping everything in its exact place. Invitations to charity galas, receipts for designer clothing, unpaid bills from the country club marked urgent. Then I saw it, a thick red folder sitting right on top of the blotter. It wasn't labeled with an innocuous title like household expenses or recipes. It had a label printed in bold black letters, estate transfer. My heart skipped a beat. I knew Lucille was planning to downsize eventually, but I didn't think she was this far along in the process. I opened the folder, and the first page made my blood run cold. Deed of gift. Grantor Lucille Vance, grantees, Trey Vance and Ashley Vance. I froze my eyes, scanning the legal jargon. It was a transfer of ownership for the lake house. The property was appraised at $3.2 million, and she was gifting it entirely to her eldest son and his wife. Not a single mention of Jamal, not a single percentage point for the son who paid her medical bills. I flipped the page, my hands trembling slightly with rage. I expected favoritism. I knew Lucille worshipped the ground Trey walked on and saw Ashley as the daughter she never had. But to cut Jamal out completely was a level of cruelty I hadn't anticipated. But as I turned to the next section, the rage turned into something colder, something sharper, something deadly. Debt, assumption, and tax, lien guarantee. I read the clause once, then I read it twice because I couldn't believe my eyes. The property was encumbered. There was a federal tax lien on the estate for unpaid property taxes and capital gains. Dating back 5 years, the total amount was $495,000. Lucille wasn't just giving the house to Trey and Ashley, she was giving them the asset. But she was stripping out the debt. She was structuring the transfer so that the new owners would take the title free and clear. So who was paying the $500,000 in debt? I looked at the bottom of the page at the line marked guarantor. There it was printed in clear legal font, Jamal Vance, and next to it in blue ink was my husband's signature. It was a draft copy, but the signature was real. He had signed it. He had actually signed a document agreeing to take on $500,000 of his mother's debt so that his brother could inherit a $3 million mansion debt-free. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The air left my lungs in a rush, making me dizzy. I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from falling. Jamal knew he knew exactly what they were doing, and he went along with it. I flipped through the rest of the documents, piecing together the timeline. There were emails printed out between Lucille and her lawyer discussing the structure. Make sure Jamal understands this is a contribution to the family legacy, Lucille had written. Trey cannot afford the tax burden right now with the new promotion and the baby on the way. Jamal has Keisha and her income. They can absorb the loss. It is the least he can do for his brother. Her income, my income. They weren't just using Jamal, they were using me. They looked at my business, my late nights, my stress, my success, and they didn't see hard work. They saw a piggy bank. They saw a resource to be harvested. They despised me. They mocked my job. They called me a glorified janitor, and yet they were banking on my money to fund their dynasty. Ashley gets the lake view and the white linen parties. Keisha gets the bill. I looked at the date on Jamal's signature. It was from last week. 2 days before we drove up here, 2 days before the dog incident. He had sat at our kitchen table in Atlanta. He had kissed me goodbye before work, and he had never mentioned that he just signed away our financial security to buy his mother's love. He was going to let me pay off a $500,000 tax bill for a house I wasn't even allowed to bring my dog into. I looked around the room, feeling a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a dysfunctional family. This was a criminal enterprise. They were fraudsters, grifters, wrapped in designer clothes and Southern charm. And Jamal was the biggest con artist of them all because he pretended to be my partner while he was robbing me blind. I took a deep breath, forcing the nausea down. I needed to be clinical. I needed to be the crisis manager. I took out my phone and I started photographing everything. Every page, every clause, every email. I made sure to get a clear shot of the tax lien number. I made sure to get a high-resolution photo of Jamal's signature. I was shaking not from fear but from adrenaline. The pieces were falling into place. The hostility toward the dog, the way they tried to keep me busy with fake crises. It was all part of the distraction they needed to keep me off balance while they finalized the theft. They thought I was too emotional to notice the numbers. They thought I was just the loud, angry wife who would be too busy fighting about the dog to check the ledger. They underestimated me. I finished photographing the last page and carefully arranged the papers back exactly as I found them. I lined up the edges of the folder with the dust outline on the desk. I made sure the chair was pushed back to the precise angle it was when I entered. I was a ghost. I was never here. As I slipped my phone back into my pocket, I heard the sound of gravel crunching outside. They were back. I walked out of the library and closed the heavy doors silently. I moved quickly to the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my face was a mask of calm. The front door opened, and their voices spilled into the foyer, loud and boisterous. "Did you see that shot on the 9th hole?" Trey was shouting, laughing that aggressive laugh of his. "And the way the cart girl looked at you." Ashley chimed in. "Honestly, Trey, you are incorrigible." I leaned against the kitchen counter, taking a sip of water, watching them come in. Lucille led the pack, looking windblown and satisfied. She spotted me in the kitchen, and her smile tightened just a fraction. "Oh, Keisha," she said, her tone dismissive. "Did you find something to occupy yourself while we were gone? I hope you didn't touch anything in the library. The cleaning staff is very particular." I smiled over the rim of my glass. A sharp, dangerous smile. "I wouldn't dream of it, Lucille," I said. "I just spent the morning reviewing some of my own files. You know how it is, always working." Jamal came in last, carrying Lucille's golf bag like a caddy. He looked tired, sweaty, and beaten down when he saw me. His eyes darted away, guilt written all over his face. "Hey, babe," he said, putting the bag down. "Did you have a good morning?" "The best," I said, looking him dead in the eye, very illuminating. He flinched, not knowing why, just sensing the shift in the air. I looked at them. This family of vultures, Lucille in her pearls, Trey in his polo shirt, Ashley in her tennis skirt, and Jamal, the sacrificial lamb. They thought they were the royalty of Atlanta. They thought they were untouchable. But I had the pictures in my pocket. I had the proof of their fraud. And most importantly, I had the checkbook. I knew about the tax lien. I knew about the debt. And I knew that without my money, that house was going to be seized by the IRS within the month. They needed me. They needed me desperate and oblivious. They needed me to sign the checks and keep my mouth shut. But the bank was closed. I set my glass down on the counter with a deliberate click. "Dinner is in an hour, right?" I asked Lucille. "I believe you said the bishop is coming." "Yes," Lucille said, eyeing me suspiciously. "Make sure you wear something appropriate. Keisha, nothing too flashy. We don't want to give the wrong impression." "Oh, don't worry," I said, walking past them toward the stairs. "I have the perfect outfit in mind." I walked up to my room, my mind racing. I wasn't going to confront them yet. Not until the ink was dry on my own plans. I had sent the photos to my lawyer, already with a simple instruction: draft a post-nuptial agreement and prepare a cease and desist for the transfer, also buy the tax debt. I was going to buy the debt myself. If they wanted Jamal to guarantee the debt, I would make sure he guaranteed it to me. I walked into the bedroom where Maya was reading a book. She looked up, hopeful. "Is it time?" she asked. "Almost, baby," I said, sitting down at my vanity and looking at my reflection. "Almost." I applied a fresh coat of red lipstick. War paint. Tonight at dinner with the bishop, and the fine china, and the lies I was going to smile and eat their food, and watch them preen. And tomorrow, the sheriff would come. Because I wasn't just the wife anymore, I was the creditor, and foreclosure is a very ugly word in polite society. The dinner with the bishop had been a masterclass in hypocrisy. Lucille had played the pious matriarch, Trey played the devoted son, and Ashley played the demure wife, while Jamal sat there sweating through his dress shirt, looking like he was waiting for a jury verdict. I had played my part too. The silent, supportive spouse nodding at the right times and keeping my glass of water full while they drained bottle after bottle of vintage Bordeaux. By the time the bishop's car taillights disappeared down the long driveway, the facade of propriety crumbled like dry cake. The humidity of the Georgia night had returned heavy and suffocating, and the family migrated to the sprawling back deck to continue their celebration. The air was thick with the sound of crickets and the smell of expensive cigars that Trey had broken out to toast his own magnificence. Ashley was wasted. There was no polite way to say it. She had started drinking during the appetizers and hadn't stopped. She was draped over a wicker lounge chair holding a glass of white wine that was dangerously close to tipping over. Her pristine white linen dress was finally rumpled, and her hair was coming loose from its severe ponytail, giving her a look of unraveled elegance. I stood by the railing looking out at the black water of the lake, holding a glass of sparkling water that Ashley assumed was a gin and tonic. I needed a clear head because while they were getting drunk on victory, I was calculating the final variables of their destruction. "Keisha," Ashley called out, her voice slurring slightly, dragging my name out into 2 long syllables. "Keisha, come sit down. You are making me nervous standing over there like a gargoyle." I turned slowly, pasting a polite smile on my face. "I am just enjoying the view." "Ashley, it is a beautiful property." Ashley let out a sharp laugh, throwing her head back. "Beautiful," she echoed. "It is magnificent. And you know the best part." I walked over to where she was sitting, taking the chair opposite her. "Tell me, Ashley, what is the best part?" She leaned forward, her eyes glassy and unfocused, searching my face for something envy maybe or submission. "The best part is that it is going to stay that way, pure. You know what I mean?" I didn't, but I knew she was dying to tell me. I crossed my legs, settling in for the confession. "I am not sure." "I do explain it to me." Ashley took a long gulp of wine, some of it splashing onto her wrist. "She didn't notice Lucille and I had a little chat while you were playing secretary in the library today. She said the papers are ready. Keisha, tomorrow morning it is official. This whole place, the house, the land, the dock, it all goes to Trey and me." I feigned surprise, widening my eyes appropriately. "Wow, tomorrow, that is fast." Ashley smirked a lopsided expression that twisted her pretty face into something ugly. "We have to move fast," she whispered conspiratorially. "Got to secure the legacy before things get complicated with Mom's health and everything. Plus, we need to make sure the right people are in charge." "The right people," I repeated, my voice neutral. "Exactly," Ashley said, gesturing vaguely with her glass. "People who understand the value of tradition. People who know how to maintain standards. You know, Keisha, I'm going to make some big changes around here once the deed is in my name." "Oh," I asked, leaning in, "what kind of changes?" Ashley's eyes narrowed, and for a second, the alcohol haze cleared enough for me to see the pure, unadulterated malice underneath. "First thing I'm going to do is put in a new security system," she said. A real one with gates and codes. We cannot have just anyone driving up here thinking they belong." She paused, letting the implication hang in the humid air like a bad smell, and then she continued, her voice dropping to a hiss. "I am going to ban all the dirty things." She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my skin, then flicking away as if she had just spotted a stain on the rug. No more muddy paws, no more loud music, no more things that don't fit the aesthetic. This is going to be a sanctuary, Keisha. A place for us, for the family. The way she said family made it clear that I was not included in that definition. Neither was Maya. Neither was Duke and Ashley's vision of the future. We were just the help, the bankroll, the unfortunate appendages attached to Jamal that she would surgically remove the moment the ink was dry. She was looking at me, waiting for me to be offended, waiting for the angry black woman to snap so she could clutch her pearls and call for Trey. But I didn't snap. I felt a calm so deep it was almost euphoric. She was bragging about a house she didn't own yet. She was banning dirt from a property that was drowning in debt. She was a queen with a cardboard crown sitting on a throne made of matchsticks. I reached for the bottle of wine on the table and leaned forward, pouring a generous amount into her nearly empty glass. "That sounds like a lot of work, Ashley," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "Running a place like this takes a lot of resources." Ashley laughed, taking the glass, her greed overriding her caution. "Oh, do not worry about resources," she said, taking a sip. "Jamal is going to help out with the boring stuff, the taxes and maintenance fees he wants to contribute, since he won't be inheriting the asset. It is only fair, right? Only fair," I agreed. Watching her drink, watching her swallow. The lie. Hook, line, and sinker. "You have really thought of everything, haven't you?" "Everything," she slurred, settling back into the cushions, looking satisfied and sleepy. "Just make sure you keep that checkbook handy. Keisha, we are going to need a new roof soon." I stood up, smoothing my dress. "You are absolutely right, Ashley. You should celebrate. You have won." "I have. Haven't I?" she mumbled, her eyes fluttering shut. "Winning feels good, it does," I whispered. "It really does." I walked away from her, leaving her to her wine and her delusions. I walked to the far end of the deck where the shadows were deepest and the Wi-Fi signal was strongest. I pulled out my phone, the screen glowing bright in the darkness. I had a message from my lawyer waiting for me. "The bank is open to selling the debt note. Keisha, but they want a premium for the expedited transfer over the weekend. They are asking for face value plus 20%. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about the savings account I had been building for years. I didn't think about the new car I wanted. I thought about Duke tied to a tree in the woods. I thought about Maya crying on the floor. I thought about Ashley's white dress and her talk of dirty things. I opened my banking app and authorized the transfer from my holding company. Then I typed a reply to my lawyer. "Buy it. Buy the debt. Buy the tax lien. Buy every single cent of liability attached to the name Lucille Vance. I don't care if it costs double. Get the papers stamped tonight. I want to be the legal holder of the note by sunrise." I hit send and watched the little progress bar fill up sending. Sent. It was done. I looked back at Ashley. She had passed out the wine glass, tilting dangerously in her hand, spilling expensive Chardonnay onto the expensive deck that she thought she owned. She was dreaming of gates and codes and exclusion zones. She was dreaming of a world where she was the queen and I was the servant. She didn't know that, while she was sleeping, I had just bought the castle. I put my phone in my pocket and walked back inside, passing Jamal, who was passed out on the sofa, mouth open, snoring softly, the guarantor of a debt that was now owned by his soon-to-be ex-wife. I went upstairs to the guest room and unlocked the door. Maya was asleep, Duke's teddy bear clutched in her arms. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the moon rise over the lake. The water looked black and cold, perfect for a burial. Because tomorrow morning I wasn't just waking up for breakfast, I was waking up for a funeral, the funeral of the Vance family legacy, and I had already paid for the casket. The sun came up on Sunday morning with a blinding brightness that felt like an interrogation lamp dragging the truth out of the shadows. The lake house was buzzing with a nervous energy that vibrated through the floorboards. I could hear the staff moving downstairs, setting up for what Lucille had termed the family summit breakfast. I took my time getting ready. I chose a black silk blouse and tailored trousers, an outfit that said funeral but looked like business. I brushed Maya's hair, braiding it tight, and whispered to her again to just watch and listen. Remember, I told her, we are the audience today. Let them put on their show. When we walked down to the sunroom, the air smelled of expensive coffee and old money desperation. The table was set with the good china, the stuff Lucille usually kept locked away for visiting dignitaries, or the bishop tray, and Ashley were already seated, looking bright-eyed and bushy-tailed despite the amount of wine they had consumed the night before. Ashley was wearing a pastel yellow dress that made her look like an Easter egg, and Trey was in a crisp polo shirt looking every inch the country club air. Jamal was sitting on the edge of his chair, looking like he was waiting for a biopsy result. He was sweating through his linen shirt, his leg bouncing up and down under the table. When he saw me walk in, relief washed over his face. He thought I was his safety net. He thought I was his checkbook. Walking into the room, "Morning, babe," he said, pulling out my chair. "You look great." I didn't answer him. I just sat down and unfolded my napkin, placing it across my lap with deliberate precision. Lucille sat at the head of the table, her hands folded in front of her, looking like a queen about to bestow knighthoods. She waited for the maid to pour everyone coffee. She waited for the silence to stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable, and then she cleared her throat. "I have gathered you all here this morning because I have come to a decision," she began, her voice echoing slightly in the glass-walled room. "As you know, your father built this estate with the intention of it remaining a cornerstone of the Vance legacy for generations. It is not just a house, it is a symbol of who we are." She paused, looking at Trey with eyes full of adoration. "Trey," she said, her voice softening, "you have stepped up in ways that make me so proud. Your promotion, your dedication to family values, your choice of a wife who understands our traditions." She nodded at Ashley, who dabbed at a dry eye with a napkin. "It has become clear to me that you are the natural custodian of this legacy." She reached under the table and pulled out the red folder, the same one I had photographed in the library. She placed it on the table and slid it toward Trey. "So I have decided to sign the deed to the lake house over to you and Ashley. Effective immediately," she announced. "You will be the sole owners of the estate, ensuring that it remains in the right hands for the future." Trey gasped, "Performance so wooden? He should have gotten splinters from it." "Mom, are you serious?" he asked, putting a hand over his heart. "This is too much. I mean, we are honored, obviously, but this is your home." "It is your home now," Lucille said, smiling, her benevolence shining down on him like a spotlight. "I want to see my grandchildren grow up running these halls. I want to know that the Vance name is safe." Ashley let out a little squeal, reaching over to clutch Trey's arm. "Oh, Lucille," she gushed. "This is the most generous gift. I cannot believe it. We will take such good care of it. I promise. I already have so many ideas for the garden." I sat there sipping my black coffee, watching them pat each other on the back. They were so happy, so secure in their theft. They thought it was over. They thought they had won the prize. Then Lucille turned her head slowly, pivoting her attention to the other side of the table where Jamal and I sat. The warmth drained from her face, replaced by a cool, expectant look. "Now, Jamal," she said, her tone shifting from loving mother to business negotiator, "do not think I have forgotten you. You are my son too, and I know how much you want to contribute to the family's success." Jamal sat up straighter, desperate for a crumb of affection. "Yeah, Mom, of course, anything you need." Lucille nodded approvingly. "I knew you would say that. Obviously, giving the house to Trey is a significant transfer of assets, but there is a small matter of housekeeping that needs to be addressed to ensure the title is clean for your brother." She opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it toward Jamal. "Not the deed, just the bill. There are some outstanding tax liabilities associated with the estate," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Just some administrative oversights from the past few years. Capital gains, property assessments, nothing major, but they need to be cleared before the transfer can be finalized. Roughly $500,000. The room went quiet. The number hung in the air. Heavy and absolute $500,000, $500,000. Jamal stared at the paper, his face draining of color. "Mom," he croaked, "500K, that is. That is a lot of money." Lucille sighed, looking disappointed already. "Jamal, we discussed this, Trey cannot take on that kind of burden right now, not with the baby coming in his new position. He needs a fresh start, and you..." She looked at me, her eyes hard. "You and Keisha are in a very different financial position. Keisha is always bragging about her $1 million contracts. Aren't you, Keisha?" She turned the full force of her manipulation onto me. "Surely for a woman of your means, contributing to the family legacy is a small price to pay to see your husband happy. Consider it a way to finally be part of the family, to show that you are committed to the Vance name." I looked at Jamal. He was looking at me, his eyes pleading, panic rising in his chest. He knew he didn't have that kind of cash liquid, not without selling assets, not without me. But he was too weak to say no to his mother. He was too terrified to be the disappointment babe. He whispered, leaning toward me, "Look, I know it is a lot, but, think about it. Mom is giving us a chance here to help out. If we do this, we are set right. We are good with the family and the business has been doing great. Maybe we can structure it as a loan or something. Can you handle it?" He was asking me to pay for the house he was kicked out of. He was asking me to fund his brother's inheritance. He was asking me to write a check for $500,000 to the people who murdered my dog and laughed about it. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, looking deep into the eyes of the man I had married and realizing there was nobody home. Ashley, sensing the hesitation, decided to jump in. She wanted to twist the knife. She wanted to make sure I knew my place wasn't just to pay, but to be grateful for the privilege. "Oh, come on, Keisha," she said, letting out a little laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Do not look so pinched. 500,000 is nothing to you, right? I mean, you are always talking about how successful you are, unless... Were you lying about all that money?" She picked up her mimosa, taking a casual sip, looking at me over the rim of the glass. "Besides," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "think of it as a fine, for the damages your dog caused." My head snapped up for the first time since the meeting started. I looked directly at her. "Damages?" I asked, my voice calm. Ashley smirked, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the property. "Oh, scratching up the door of the shed, leaving hair everywhere, making the property look trashy. Honestly, having that beast around lowered the property value. We are just asking you to pay to clean up the mess you brought here. It is only fair, right? If you want to be part of this family, you have to pay your dues." The audacity was breathtaking. It was a work of art, really. They sat there eating eggs, Benedict, drinking champagne in a house they couldn't afford, asking the woman they despised to save them and insulting her while they did it. They expected me to get angry. They expected me to yell, to protest, to cry about the unfairness of it all. They had their scripts ready. Lucille would call me selfish, Trey would call me cheap, Jamal would beg me to calm down, but I didn't do any of those things. I felt a bubble rising in my chest. It started in my stomach, traveled up my throat, and burst out of my mouth. I laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It wasn't a nervous giggle. It was a full-throated, genuine belly laugh that echoed off the glass walls of the sunroom. I laughed until my eyes watered. I laughed until my ribs hurt. I laughed at the absurdity, the hubris, the sheer unmitigated gall of these people. The sound stopped the room dead. Lucille froze her fork halfway to her mouth. Ashley's smirk faltered, replaced by confusion. Trey frowned, looking at Jamal like his wife had finally cracked. "Keisha," Jamal whispered, touching my arm. "You are scaring me. Stop it." But I couldn't stop. I laughed harder, looking at Ashley, looking at the yellow dress that cost more than she had ever earned in her life, looking at Trey, who thought he was a king, looking at Lucille, who thought she was a god. You think this is funny?" Lucille demanded, her voice trembling with rage. "I am discussing the future of this family and you are laughing like a hyena." I wiped a tear from my eye, taking a deep breath, trying to compose myself, but a fresh wave of amusement washed over me. "I am sorry," I gasped, waving my hand at them. I am so sorry, Lucille. It is just... You are right. It is absolutely hilarious. What is Ashley? Asked, her voice shrill. You, I said, looking her dead in the eye. You think $500,000 is a fine for a dog scratch? You think I am going to write a check to buy you a house? You think this is how the world works? I stood up, pushing my chair back, the legs screeching against the tile floor. You really have no idea, do you? I asked, looking around the table at their stunned faces. You have been living in this bubble of entitlement for so long, you forgot that gravity exists. Keisha, sit down, Lucille ordered, slamming her hand on the table. You are embarrassing yourself. No, Lucille, I said, my voice suddenly devoid of humor. Cold and hard as a diamond. I am not embarrassing myself. I am enjoying the show. I walked over to the window, looking out at the driveway, looking for the dust cloud that would signal the arrival of the sheriff, looking for the end of their reign. You want $500,000? I asked, turning back to them. You want me to pay the debt so Trey can have the deed? Yes, Lucille hissed. That is the deal. Take it or leave it. Oh, I will take it, I said, smiling that sharp, dangerous smile again. But not the way you think. Ashley rolled her eyes. God, she is so dramatic. Just sign the check, Keisha, and go back to your room. We have celebrating to do. I looked at Maya, who was watching me with wide, knowing eyes. She knew what was coming. She knew the monster in the room wasn't the dog. It was her mother. I looked at Jamal, who was staring at me like he had never seen me before. You know what I said? Picking up the red folder and tossing it back onto the table, sliding it across the polished wood until it hit Trey's water glass with a thud. I think I will save my money today. You are refusing, Lucille asked, her voice rising to a shriek. You are refusing to help the family. I am refusing to play your game. Lucille, I said, walking toward the door. Where are you going? Jamal cried, jumping up. Keisha, come back here, we have to fix this. I paused in the doorway, looking back at them, trapped in their sunroom, trapped in their greed, trapped in their debt. I'm going to get some fresh air, I said. I think I hear a car coming up the driveway. Maybe it is the guest you weren't expecting. I walked out, leaving them in the silence, leaving them with the bill, leaving them with their illusions. I could hear them starting to argue behind me, Lucille yelling at Jamal, Ashley, complaining about my attitude. Trey trying to calm everyone down. They didn't know the clock had run out. They didn't know the check had already cleared, but not for them. I walked out onto the front porch just as the sheriff's cruiser turned onto the main road, followed closely by a black sedan, the dust kicking up behind them like a storm warning. I stood there, arms crossed, waiting for the knock, waiting for the scream, waiting for the payoff. They wanted a scene. Well, I was about to give them a blockbuster. The laughter died in my throat, leaving a bitter taste like ash. The room was silent again, but it wasn't the silence of confusion anymore. It was the silence of a bomb squad waiting for the wire to be cut. I turned my back on the window and the driveway where the dust was settling, and I focused my entire being on the man sitting across the table. Jamal Vance, my husband for 10 years, the father of my child, the man who had sworn before God and our families to protect me. He was looking at me with eyes that were wide and wet, pleading with me to get back in line, to stop making a scene, to just write the check so we could go back to pretending we were happy. I walked back to the table slowly, my heels clicking against the tile, a rhythmic countdown. I stopped right behind his chair and leaned down so my face was level with his. Jamal, I said, my voice soft, but carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. Look at me. He turned his head, flinching as if he expected me to hit him. You were really going to do it, weren't you? I asked. I picked up the red folder again and flipped it open to the signature page, pointing at his scrawl in blue ink. You were going to sign the final papers. You were going to leverage our assets, our savings, the money I made from blood, sweat, and tears to pay off a debt for a house you will never own. Jamal swallowed hard, wiping sweat from his upper lip, looking at his mother for cues on what to say. But Lucille was silent, watching us with cold calculation. She wanted to see if her training had held, if her soldier would fall on his sword. Keisha. Listen, he whispered, reaching for my hand but stopping short when he saw the look in my eyes. You do not understand the big picture. Mom explained it to me. It is about long-term strategy. Strategy, I repeated. Yes, he said, gaining a little confidence, grasping at the straws of his delusion. Mom promised that if we cover this lien, if we help Trey secure the estate, she is going to deed us the land in Waycross. You know, the plot near the creek. We can build our own place there, babe. Vacation home just for us. And Maya, it is 5 acres. Keisha, 5 acres of our own land. I stared at him, unable to comprehend the level of stupidity I was witnessing. Waycross, I asked, my voice flat. Yes, Waycross. Jamal nodded eagerly. It is beautiful out there, quiet, private. We can build a cabin, Jamal, I said, cutting him off. That land is a swamp. He blinked. What I researched the family holdings last night. Jamal, that 5 acres in Waycross is a designated wetland. It is underwater 6 months out of the year, and it is zoned for conservation. You cannot build a cabin there. You cannot even build a shed. It is worthless dirt filled with mosquitoes and mud. Jamal's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. But, Mom said, Mom lied. I snapped, slamming the folder shut. She sold you a swamp to get you to pay for a castle. She dangled a carrot in front of you that was rotten to the core, and you bit it. You bit it so hard you were willing to bankrupt your own family. Lucille stiffened. Keisha, that is enough, she warned. Do not speak about family business. You do not understand. I understand perfectly, Lucille, I said, not looking at her, keeping my eyes locked on my husband. I understand that you raised a son to be a sacrifice, not a man. I looked back at Jamal, seeing the pathetic hope draining out of him, replaced by the dawning horror that he had been played, not by me, but by the woman at the head of the table. But here is the worst part. Jamal, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to fill the room. I could almost forgive the money. Money is just paper. I can make more money. I always do. I paused, letting the words sink in. But you let them take the dog. Jamal flinched physically, recoiling. You stood. There I continued, my voice trembling with the first real emotion I had shown all morning. You stood in the driveway, and you watched your brother pay a drunk to drag Duke away. You heard him crying. Jamal, Maya told me he was crying, and you did nothing. You didn't fight. You didn't scream. You didn't call me. You just stood there and let them erase a member of our family because you were afraid of upsetting your mother. It was for the best, Jamal whispered, tears leaking out of his eyes. Now Mom said it was for safety. Safety, I spat. You are the danger, Jamal. You are the biggest threat to this family because you will not protect us. You will not protect Maya. You will not protect me. You will feed us to the wolves if Lucille tells you it is dinner time. I stood up straight, feeling a sudden lightness, a shedding of weight I hadn't realized I was carrying for a decade. I looked down at my left hand at the diamond ring that Jamal had put there 10 years ago. It was a beautiful ring, or at least I used to. Think so. Now it just looked like a shackle. I reached over with my right hand and twisted it. Jamal's eyes went to my hands, panic flaring in his chest. Keisha, what are you doing? I pulled the ring off. It slid over my knuckle easily, as if it knew it didn't belong there anymore. I held it up, letting the light from the chandelier catch the stone one last time. You want to pay for this house? I asked. I dropped the ring onto the table. It hit the glass surface with a sharp, heavy clink. It spun for a second, a golden blur before settling in front of the red folder. Use that, I said. Jamal stared at the ring, his face crumbling. Keisha, please do not do this. We can talk about this. We can fix it. No, Jamal, I said, my voice devoid of anger, devoid of love, just empty. There is no fixing this. I do not pay debts for strangers, and as of this moment, that is what you are to me. Lucille let out a scoff. Oh, stop the theatrics, Keisha. You are not going anywhere. You are just throwing a tantrum because you didn't get your way. Pick up the ring and sit down. You are making a spectacle of yourself. I turned to Lucille, giving her one last look of pity. You are right, Lucille, I said. I am making a spectacle, but the show isn't over yet. I looked back at Jamal, who was sobbing now, head in his hands, the broken little boy she had created. "You let them throw away Duke," I said, my voice breaking on the dog's name. "My loyal, sweet Duke, who would have died to protect you. And now you want to throw away Maya's future. You want to drain her college fund to pay for Trey's pool parties. You want to leverage her security to buy your mother's love." I leaned in close, so only he could hear the final nail in the coffin. "I won't let you," I whispered. "I am the crisis manager. Jamal and I am managing you out of our lives." I turned around and walked toward the door, my finger hovering over my phone screen, ready to send the final text to the sheriff who was waiting at the gate. "I am not your wife anymore," I said over my shoulder. "I am your eviction notice." Jamal screamed my name, a desperate broken sound, but I didn't stop walking. I walked out of the sunroom and into the foyer, just as the heavy front door knocker slammed 3 times. Boom, boom, boom. The sound echoed through the house like the heartbeat of a giant. I stopped and smiled, wiping a single tear from my cheek. Time to let the real owners in. The heavy thud of the brass knocker against the solid oak door echoed through the foyer, like the gavel of a judge pronouncing a life sentence. Boom, 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 it stopped. The screaming match in the sunroom. Instantly, Jamal's sobbing cut off. Lucille's tirade died in her throat, and even Ashley froze her hand halfway to her wine glass. I stood at the base of the grand staircase, my hand resting on the banister, cool and smooth under my palm. I didn't turn around. I didn't flinch. I just waited. The timing was exquisite, precise. Down to the second, Marcus had coordinated with the local authorities perfectly, and my lawyer had filed the emergency motion exactly. When the courthouse opened, Lucille was the first to recover. Of course, she smoothed the front of her silk blouse, taking a deep breath and rearranging her features from a mask of rage back into the benevolent matriarch. She sniffed disdainfully, looking at the mess of emotions on Jamal's face, and then casting a withering glance at my back. "Pull yourself together, Jamal," she hissed. "Stand up straight. Honestly, you are acting like a child." Then she turned her attention to the front door, a smile touching her lips that was equal parts relief and arrogance. "It must be the notary," she announced, her voice bright and cheery, once again washing away the ugliness of the last 10 minutes with a fresh coat of denial. "He is early. How wonderful we can get the signatures done and put this unpleasantness behind us." She looked at Ashley, who was still staring at me with hatred in her eyes. "Ashley, darling," she said, clapping her hands lightly. "Go. Answer the door. Bring him into the library. We'll handle Keisha and Jamal. We will meet you in there in 5 minutes to sign the deed. It is time to make you the lady of the house." Ashley preened. The transformation was instantaneous. She went from a mean drunk to the lady of the manor in the blink of an eye. She set her glass down and fluffed her hair, pulling the shoulders of her yellow dress up to look more respectable. She cast a triumphant look at me as she walked past, a look that said, "You lose and I win. I will get it, Lucille," she chirped, stepping around me with a wide berth as if poverty might be contagious. She walked to the door with a swing in her hips, already imagining her name on the mailbox, already redesigning the landscaping in her head. I stayed where I was, a silent observer in the hallway, watching the scene unfold like a slow-motion car crash. I knew what was on the other side of that door. I knew it wasn't a notary with a stamp and a smile. Ashley reached for the handle, turning it with a flourish. "Hello," she sang out, pulling the door wide open. "We are so glad you are. The greeting died in her throat, choked off by a gasp of confusion. Standing on the porch was not a notary in a cheap suit. It was Sheriff Miller, a man built like a vending machine with a face carved out of granite. Behind him stood 2 deputies, their hands resting casually near their belts, and beside the sheriff stood a man in a sharp, charcoal gray suit, holding a briefcase. Mr. Sterling, the representative from the bank. The heat from outside rolled into the air-conditioned foyer, carrying the scent of dust and trouble. Ashley took a step back, her hand flying to her throat. "May I help you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. We weren't expecting law enforcement. "Is there a problem in the neighborhood?" Sheriff Miller didn't smile. He stepped over the threshold, his boots making a heavy sound on the floorboards that Lucille prized so highly. "I am looking for Lucille Vance," he rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly, "and Trey Vance." Ashley blinked, confused. "Well, yes, they are inside, but we are in the middle of a private family meeting. Is this about the noise complaint? Because honestly, the neighbors are just jealous of Sheriff Miller." Ignored her. He walked past her into the foyer, his eyes scanning the space until they landed on me. He gave me a curt nod, a professional acknowledgement of the tip-off, then looked toward the sunroom where Lucille and Trey were emerging, curious about the commotion. "What is going on here?" Lucille demanded, marching into the foyer with her chin held high, Trey flanking her like a bodyguard. "Ashley, who is this?" Ashley was backing away, looking pale. "It is the sheriff, Lucille." Lucille stopped, her eyes, narrowing. "Sheriff Miller, I presume?" She said, her tone dripping with condensation. "I must say, barging into a private residence without an invitation is highly irregular. Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are." "Mrs. Vance," Sheriff Miller said. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his front pocket and snapped it open. "I am here to serve you with an order of immediate eviction and a writ of possession." The words hung in the air, foreign and impossible in this house of luxury. "Eviction?" Lucille laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement that sounded like a cough. "Sheriff, you must be joking. Eviction is for apartments in the city, not for the Vance estate. This is my home. I own this property, free and clear." "Mr. Sterling," the man in the charcoal suit stepped forward. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Lucille with the bored expression of a man who had seen 1,000 denials, just like this one. "Actually, Mrs. Vance, that is not correct," he said, his voice dry and precise. "According to the bank's records and the county clerk's filings, you have defaulted on your primary mortgage, your secondary home equity line of credit, and the emergency bridge loan you took out 6 months ago." Lucille's face went gray, the blood draining out of her cheeks so fast I thought she might faint. That is a private matter," she stammered, looking at Trey, who was staring at her with his mouth open. "I have an arrangement with the bank vice president. We are restructuring the debt. That arrangement expired 60 days ago." Mr. Sterling said, checking his watch. "You missed the restructuring deadline and the grace period passed on Friday at 5 p.m. Lucille swayed, grabbing Trey's arm for support. But it is Sunday. Banks are closed. The markets are never closed." "Mrs. Vance," Mr. Sterling said, "as of this morning at 8 a.m., your debt was sold to a private investment firm. They purchased the note in full, including the tax liens and the overdue interest." "Sold?" Lucille whispered. "Sold to who?" Mr. Sterling ignored the question. "The new lien holder has exercised the immediate foreclosure clause in the mortgage contract due to the significant arrears and evidence of asset mismanagement. They have obtained an emergency court order for repossession. Effectively, immediately." Trey stepped forward, his face flushing red with anger. Listening to this, "Wait a minute. Hold on, just a damn minute. You cannot just walk in here and kick us out. This is my inheritance. My mother was just about to sign the deed over to me." Mr. Sterling looked at Trey with pity. "She cannot sign over what she does not own, son. The deed is frozen. The house belongs to the note holder now." "This is bulls," Trey shouted, stepping into the sheriff's space. "You are trespassing. Do you know who my father was? Do you know the people I know? I will have your badge for this. I will sue the bank into the ground. Get the hell out of my house." Sheriff Miller didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just rested his hand on his belt, not on his gun, but near enough to send a message. "Son," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "I suggest you lower your voice and step back. This is a court order signed by Judge Higgins. I have 3 deputies outside and a truck coming to change the locks. You have 30 minutes to gather your personal effects and vacate the premises. Anything left behind will be moved to storage at your expense." 30 minutes, Ashley shrieked, finding her voice. 30 minutes, I cannot pack my life. In 30 minutes, my clothes, my jewelry, my skincare. Are you insane? You should have thought about that before you stopped paying the mortgage, ma'am, Sheriff Miller said. Jamal had come out of the sunroom, now standing in the doorway, looking like a ghost. He was staring at his mother, horror written all over his face. "Mom," he whispered, "is it true? Did you really default?" Lucille turned on him, snapping like a cornered animal. "Shut up, Jamal. Do not look at me like that. It was a cash flow problem, just a temporary liquidity issue. I was handling it. I just needed you to sign the tax guarantee to bridge the gap until the trust fund unlocked next month." "You wanted me to guarantee a debt on a house you didn't even own?" Jamal asked, his voice rising. "You wanted me to take on $500,000 of liability for a property that was already in foreclosure." "I was protecting the legacy," Lucille screamed, losing her composure completely. "I did it for the family. I did it for you." "For me?" Trey yelled, turning on her. "You lied to me. You told me the house was paid off. You stood there at breakfast and gave me a speech about custodianship and legacy, and you were handing me a bankruptcy filing. You were going to let me move my pregnant wife into a house that the bank was taking away. I was going to fix it," Lucille sobbed, grabbing his lapels. "Trey, baby, listen to me. If Jamal had just signed the check, I could have stalled them. I could have used his cash to pay the interest and buy us another 6 months. I had a plan. So I was the mark?" Jamal asked, his voice breaking. "I wasn't the son. I was the wallet." "You are all ungrateful," Lucille shrieked, pushing Trey away, looking wild-eyed. "I gave you everything. This life, these clothes, this status, and the moment. There is a little bump in the road, you turn on me. A bump in the road," Mr. Sterling interrupted, his voice cutting through the hysteria. "Mrs. Vance, you are $3.2 million in debt. This isn't a bump, it is a crater." Lucille whirled on him. "Get out!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "Get out of my house. I am not leaving. I will not leave." Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his patience evaporating. "Mrs. Vance, you can walk out of here on your own 2 feet with your dignity intact, or you can be escorted out in handcuffs for trespassing. Those are your options. Pick one." Ashley burst into tears, loud, ugly sobs that echoed in the foyer. "Oh my God," she wailed. "This cannot be happening. What will people say? Where are we going to go?" "Trey, do something. Fix this. You said you were in charge." Trey looked around the room, looking for a way out, looking for someone to blame. His eyes landed on me. "Keisha," he said, pointing a finger at me. "This is your fault, isn't it? You knew something. You were looking at those papers in the library. You knew and you didn't say anything. You let us sit there like idiots." I looked at him calmly, my arms crossed over my chest. "I didn't know anything." "Trey," I said, lying with the ease of a professional. "I just knew I wasn't going to pay for a swamp in Waycross." "Help us," Trey begged, his arrogance gone, replaced by desperation. "Keisha, you have money, you have connections. Talk to them, buy us some time, write a check, whatever it takes. We will pay you back. I promise. Pay me back," I asked. Raising an eyebrow with what Trey, with the job, you only have because of nepotism, with the inheritance that doesn't exist. You have nothing. Please, Keisha. Lucille stepped forward, clutching my arm, her nails digging into my silk blouse. "We are family. You cannot let them throw me out on the street. Think of the scandal. Think of Maya." I pulled my arm away, brushing the spot where she touched me like it was dirty. "I am thinking of Maya Lucille," I said. "I am thinking that I am glad she is upstairs with headphones on, so she doesn't have to see her grandmother begging. I am thinking that a woman who would murder a dog doesn't deserve a roof over her head. You heartless bitch." Ashley spat, her mascara running down her face. "You are enjoying this, aren't you?" I looked at the sheriff. "Officer, is the clock running?" "Sheriff." Miller checked his watch. 25 minutes left. "Folks, I suggest you start packing." The reality finally hit them, the denial shattered, replaced by panic. Ashley kicked off her heels and ran for the stairs, screaming about her designer bags. Trey stood there shaking his head, muttering to himself. Lucille collapsed onto the bench in the foyer, sobbing into her hands, a broken old woman who had finally run out of lies, and Jamal. Jamal just stood there looking at me, looking at the ring on the table in the sunroom, looking at the wreckage of his life. He walked over to me slowly, his eyes hollow. "You really aren't going to help, are you?" he asked. I looked at him, and I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just the empty space where my love used to be. "I already helped, Jamal," I said. "I saved you from signing that guarantee." I saved you from $500,000 of debt. That is the last thing I will ever do for you." He nodded slowly, accepting his fate. Then he turned and walked toward the stairs to pack his bags, to pack the life of a man who had chosen the wrong side. I watched them scramble. I watched them run around like ants whose hill had been kicked over, grabbing vases, grabbing silver, grabbing anything they could carry, trying to salvage the scraps of their materialism. Mr. Sterling walked over to me, standing beside me as we watched the chaos. "Ms. Vance," he said quietly, keeping his voice low so only I could hear. "The transfer is complete. The wire cleared 10 minutes ago. The deed has been recorded electronically." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my eyes on Lucille, who was trying to stuff a candelabra into her purse. "Do you want me to inform them?" he asked. "Do you want to tell them who the new owner is?" "Not yet," I said, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. "Let them pack. Let them sweat. Let them think it is some faceless corporation. Let them think it is a stranger. I wanted them to feel the fear of the unknown. I wanted them to feel powerless. I wanted them to experience exactly what my daughter felt when she read that note on her door. Sheriff Miller barked orders directing his deputies to supervise the packing to make sure they didn't damage the property, damaging my property. I turned and walked toward the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. My throat was dry, but my spirit was full. They had 30 minutes. 30 minutes to erase 40 years of pretension. 30 minutes to realize that the aesthetic they worshipped was just a facade. I took a sip of water, cool and refreshing, listening to the sounds of their destruction upstairs, the thud of suitcases, the crash of something breaking, the sound of Ashley screaming at Trey. It was music, sweet, violent music. And the best part was the encore was still to come. The chaos in the foyer had settled into a grim rhythm of defeat, with deputies watching stone-faced as the Vance family scrambled to shove their lives into Louis Vuitton duffel bags. But Lucille wasn't moving. She sat slumped on the velvet bench near the door, looking small and withered, her skin gray under the harsh chandelier light. She was staring at Mr. Sterling, who was snapping the locks on his briefcase, preparing to leave his job done. "Who she?" whispered, her voice cracking like dry parchment, breaking the silence of the packing. She looked up at him, her eyes rimmed with red, desperate for a name, desperate for a target who bought it. "Mr. Sterling, you said a private investment firm, but there has to be a name, a person, someone I can call, someone I can reason with." Mr. Sterling paused, his hand on the brass handle of the front door. He looked at her with a mixture of professional detachment and mild pity. "The disclosure of the buyer is a matter of public record, Mrs. Vance, now that the deed has been recorded," he said. "However, the principal of the purchasing entity requested anonymity during the transaction." "Anonymity?" Lucille spat the word, regaining a flicker of her old venom. "Cowards! They are vultures picking over the bones of my legacy. I want a name. I demand a name. I will sue them for predatory lending. I will drag them into court for years. Who are they?" I stepped away from the wall, then my heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor, the sound cutting through the room like a metronome, counting down the final seconds of their reign. I walked past Jamal, who was staring at his shoes, past Trey, who was aggressively shoving golf shirts into a bag, and past Ashley, who was weeping over a jewelry box. I stopped at the fireplace, the centerpiece of the grand living room, where a massive oil painting of Lucille hung above the mantel, and below it on the marble hearth sat a collection of silver-framed photographs. The shrine to the Vance dynasty. I reached out and picked up the largest frame, the one in the center. It was a studio portrait taken 5 years ago, featuring Lucille sitting on a throne-like chair, with Trey standing proudly behind her, his hand on her shoulder, and Ashley seated at her feet, smiling up adoringly. Jamal wasn't in the photo. I wasn't in the photo. We had been the ones holding the reflector screens behind the photographer that day. I looked at the picture for a long moment, studying their frozen smiles, their arrogance, immortalized in silver, halide. "It is a beautiful frame," I said, my voice calm and clear, drawing every eye in the room toward me. Lucille looked up, confused and irritated. "Put that down, Keisha. Do not touch my things. Those are for the movers." I turned the frame over in my hands, feeling the weight of it. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, I placed it back on the mantel, face down the glass, clicking against the marble. The smiling faces of the Vance family buried in the dark. "You want to know who bought the debt?" "Lucille," I asked, turning to face her. She stared at me, her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "You asked for a name," I said. I walked toward the center of the room, reaching into my structured tote bag. I bypassed the tissues and the lip gloss and pulled out a thick document bound in blue legal backing. The paper was crisp and fresh, the ink still smelling of the printer. Mr. Sterling said the buyer was KV Holdings, LLC. "Correct?" Mr. Sterling nodded slowly, looking at me with a new respect. "That is correct, ma'am." Lucille scoffed. "KV Holdings, some faceless shell company, probably foreign investors trying to park their cash." K.V.I repeated, enunciating each letter clearly. K for Keisha, 5 for Vance. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. The air sucked out of the space, leaving everyone gasping for breath. Ashley stopped crying, her mouth hanging open in a perfect O of shock. Trey dropped the shirt he was holding, his hands going slack. Jamal looked up, his eyes widening until I thought they might pop out of his skull. Lucille just stared, her brain refusing to process the information, blocking it out like a trauma. "What did you say?" she whispered. I opened the blue folder and pulled out the top sheet, the transfer of lien ownership stamped with the official seal of the county clerk and the bank's authorization code. I walked over to Lucille and held the paper out to her, not close enough for her to snatch it, but close enough for her to read the bold print, "I am KV Holdings, Lucille." I said, my voice steady, devoid of triumph, just stating facts like a coroner reading a time of death. I formed the LLC 3 years ago to handle my consulting assets, my crisis management fees, my investments. It is the entity that just wire transferred $3.7 million to the bank to purchase your debt, your mortgage, and your tax liens. I let the paper drop. It fluttered down, landing on her lap like a dead leaf. Lucille stared at it, her hands shaking so hard she couldn't pick it up. She read the lines, her lips moving silently, tracing the numbers, tracing the name, Keisha Vance listed as the managing member and sole proprietor. "No," she breathed, looking up at me with horror. "That is impossible. You fix scandals for rappers. You don't have this kind of money." I smiled, a cold, razor-thin expression that I saved for my most difficult clients. "I fix scandals for billionaires. Lucille," I said, "for tech moguls and senators. And yes, sometimes for rappers who pay in cash and equity. I have been telling you for years that my business was successful, but you never listened. You were too busy making fun of my blazer or asking why I didn't work at a bank. You were so obsessed with your idea of what success looks like that you missed the woman standing right in front of you who was building an empire." Ashley finally found her voice, a shrill screech that grated on my ears. "You bought the house," she screamed. "You bought our house." I turned to her, my gaze flat. "It is not your house, Ashley. It never was. It was the bank's house, and now it is my house." I reached into the folder again and pulled out the deed, pulling out the final piece of the puzzle. "This morning at 9 a.m., Mr. Sterling and I executed the foreclosure clause as the new lien holder. I exercised my right to immediate possession due to the distress of the asset and the risk of flight. I paid the arrears, I paid the penalties, and I paid the principal. I own the roof over your head, I own the floor under your feet, I own the gate you tried to lock me out of." I looked around the room, taking in the high ceilings, the crown molding the trappings of wealth that they had used to beat me down for a decade. "And the first thing I'm going to do as owner," I said, "is fumigate, because the stench of entitlement in here is overwhelming." Lucille let out a wail, a guttural sound of pure despair. She slumped back against the bench, clutching her chest, looking like she had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. "My house," she sobbed, "my legacy, my beautiful home taken by her. Taken by the person who offered to save you?" I corrected her voice hard. I offered to pay the tax lien. Lucille, I offered to help, but you had to push it. You had to humiliate me. You had to try and steal from my husband. You had to hurt my child and my dog. So now I didn't just pay the tax. I paid it all, and unlike you, I paid cash. Trey stepped forward, his face purple, a vein throbbing in his forehead. You bitch, he shouted, lunging toward me. You set us up. You planned this. Sheriff Miller stepped in front of me, casually, placing a hand on Trey's chest, stopping him in his tracks with the immovable force of the law. I wouldn't do that, son, the sheriff warned, unless you want to add assault to the trespassing charge. Trey backed down, breathing hard. His fists clenched at his sides. You cannot do this, he spat at me. We are family. Ashley scrambled up from the floor, clutching her pearl necklace, looking wild-eyed. Yes, exactly, she cried, latching onto the word like a lifeline. We are family, Keisha. Cannot kick family out on the street. Think about the baby. Think about Connor. We are your flesh and blood. Well, by marriage. But it counts. You have to let us stay. We can work this out. We can pay rent. I laughed, a short, dry sound that held no humor. Family, I repeated, tasting the word, finding it sour. Family protects each other. Ashley family doesn't hire a drunk to drag a defenseless animal into the woods to die because he doesn't match the furniture. Ashley flinched, stepping back as I advanced on her. You threw my dog away, I said, my voice dropping to a hiss. I stepped into her personal space, forcing her to look at me, to really see me. You left a note on my 12-year-old daughter's door, telling her to get over it. You told me to buy her a goldfish. You looked me in the eye and laughed about traumatizing my child, and now you want to talk about family. I turned to Trey, looking him up and down with disgust. You paid $500 to kill Duke, I said. $500 was the price of your morality, and now $3 million is the price of mine. I turned to the sheriff, taking a deep breath, centering myself, feeling the power humming in my veins. Sheriff Miller, I said, my voice ringing out clear and authoritative as the legal owner of this property, I am formally revoking permission for these individuals to be on the premises. I checked my watch, my diamond bezel catching the light. They have 20 minutes left. I continued. I want them gone. Sheriff, every single one of them. If they are not on the other side of that gate in 20 minutes, I want them arrested for criminal trespass. Sheriff Miller tipped his hat. Yes, ma'am. You heard the lady. Folks' clock is ticking. Panic erupted, fresh and frantic. Ashley started screaming at Trey to grab the silver. Lucille was moaning, rocking back and forth, unable to stand. Trey was cursing, throwing things into bags with violent motions. And Jamal hadn't moved. He was still standing by the stairs, staring at me with that hollow look. The look of a man who realizes he bet on the wrong horse and lost everything. He took a step toward me, his hands reaching out, palms up, a gesture of supplication. Keisha, he said, his voice shaking. Please, baby. You are angry. I get it. You are mad about the dog and the money, and you have every right to be. But this is nuclear. This is destroying everything. We can fix this. Okay, just stop. The sheriff let Mom stay. We can go back to Atlanta. We can talk. I looked at his hands, the hands I had held during childbirth, the hands I had held at our wedding, the hands that had signed a document to bankrupt us. I am not angry, Jamal, I said, looking him in the eye and seeing nothing but a stranger. I am not mad. Anger is a hot emotion. Anger means I still care. I stepped back out of his reach, putting up a wall of ice between us. I am indifferent, I said, and that is so much worse. Jamal's face crumbled, tears spilling over his cheeks. But we are married, he whispered. You are my wife. You cannot just throw me out with them. I didn't know about the dog, Keisha. I swear I didn't know they were going to hurt him. I just thought they were taking him to a shelter. You didn't ask, I countered. You didn't check. You didn't protect us. You assumed the best of them and the worst of me. And that is a betrayal I cannot forgive. I reached into my tote bag one last time, bypassing the checkbook and pulling out a white envelope, legal size sealed. I walked over to the hall table, the antique table that Lucille claimed was brought over on the Mayflower, and I placed the envelope in the center. What is that? Jamal asked, staring at the white rectangle like it was a bomb. It is a bomb for his life. That I said is a copy of the divorce petition. My lawyer filed it electronically an hour ago. You will get the official service at your office on Monday, along with a restraining order, preventing you from accessing any of our joint accounts or entering my property in Atlanta. Divorce. Jamal choked out, falling to his knees, the word hitting him like a physical blow. But the assets, the house in Buckhead, my car. I smiled that dangerous smile again. Do you remember the day before our wedding? Jamal, I asked softly. Do you remember sitting in your mother's living room with her lawyer while she forced me to sign that ironclad prenuptial agreement because she was so terrified the poor girl was going to steal the Vance fortune? Jamal nodded, dumbly, eyes wide. She made sure to include a clause. I continued. A clause that stated any assets acquired independently during the marriage would remain the sole property of the individual who earned them. She thought she was protecting your trust fund. She thought she was protecting Trey's inheritance. I leaned down, whispering the final verdict. She was protecting me. Jamal, because I am the one who earns the money. I am the one who built the assets. That prenup is the reason I get to keep my house, my car, my business, and this lake house, and you get to keep your mother. I straightened up, looking at the pathetic tableau of the Vance family. Lucille broken on the bench, Ashley hysterical, Trey defeated, and Jamal on his knees. It is poetic justice, really, I said, turning toward the door. I followed her rules. I played her game, and I won. I walked to the front door and opened it wide, letting the hot Georgia air rush in, displacing the stale air of their aristocracy. 15 minutes. I called out, checking my watch again. Don't forget your golf clubs. Trey, it is a long walk to the highway. I stepped out onto the porch, leaving them to their misery. I walked down the steps to where my rental car was parked, where Maya was watching from the window, her headphones around her neck, a small smile on her face. She knew I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. I knew what was happening inside the dismantling of an ego, the collapse of a dynasty. I looked toward the gate where a black sedan was pulling in, followed by a luxury SUV. My team, my security, my people, and in the back of that SUV, I knew there was a very good boy waiting for a treat. The dog was coming home, the family was getting out, and I was finally free. The sheriff's deputies formed a wall of khaki and authority, herding the Vance dynasty out of the foyer and onto the porch. They had once ruled. The procession was a pathetic parade of defeat. Lucille was leaning heavily on Trey, weeping openly into a handkerchief that was already soaked through. Her makeup was running, leaving dark streaks down her face that looked like cracks in a porcelain doll. She kept muttering about her legacy, about the injustice, about how she was going to call the governor. But nobody was listening. Not even her son Ashley was behind her, dragging a suitcase that was too heavy for her. Stumbling in her wedges, she was spitting venom, cursing at the deputies, cursing at the heat, and most of all, cursing at me. She called me every name in the book, trying to provoke a reaction, trying to drag me down into the mud with her. But I just stood there, leaning against the doorframe, cool and untouched, watching the trash take itself out. Trey looked like a man walking to the gallows. His polo shirt was stained with sweat. His face was pale and pasty. The arrogance that had defined him for 36 years had evaporated, leaving behind a scared little boy who didn't know how to survive without his mother's checkbook. And Jamal brought up the rear, walking with his head down, carrying a single duffel bag. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at his family. He just stared at the ground, putting one foot in front of the other, a ghost walking through the ruins of his own making. They reached the bottom of the steps and headed toward the row of luxury vehicles parked in the circular drive. Trey's black Range Rover, Lucille's silver Mercedes, and the white BMW convertible that Ashley treated like a child. They started fishing for their keys, eager to get into the air conditioning, eager to speed. Away from their humiliation, I cleared my throat, the sound cutting through the humid air. "Sheriff Miller!" I called out, walking down the steps. Slowly, my eyes locked on Trey's hand as he reached for the door handle. "I believe there is one more matter of property to settle." Trey froze, looking back at me with suspicion. "What now?" "Keisha, you took the house, isn't that enough? I walked over to him, holding out my hand, palm up. "The keys, Trey," I said. He laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. "Are you crazy? This is my car. It is leased in my name." "Actually," I said, pulling a piece of paper from my pocket, enjoying the look of confusion on his face. "It is leased in the name of Vance Family Enterprises, the holding company that Lucille used to manage the estate's expenses. And since I just acquired all the assets and liabilities of that entity, including the fleet leases, due to the default clause triggered by the foreclosure, I am afraid the vehicles are now under my control." I wiggled my fingers. "Give them to me." "You have got to be kidding me," Ashley shrieked, dropping her suitcase. "You are going to strand us here in the middle of nowhere. I am protecting my assets." "Ashley," I said calmly, "these cars are collateral. I cannot have you depreciating them or driving them off to hide them. I am repossessing them, effective immediately." Lucille looked up from her weeping, her eyes wide with horror. "Keisha, please," she whispered. "This is cruel, even for you. How are we supposed to leave?" "There is a taxi service in town," I said, checking my watch, though, on a Sunday afternoon. "The wait might be a little long. I suggest you call now before the surge pricing kicks in." Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "Hand them over, son," he said to Trey. "Unless you want to add grand theft auto to your list of problems today." Trey stared at me, his face turning a deep, violent shade of purple. He looked like he wanted to hit me. He looked like he wanted to kill me. But he looked at the sheriff, and he looked at the gun. Oh. And he broke. He slammed the keys into my hand with enough force to bruise. "I hope you rot in hell, Keisha," he spat. I smiled, closing my fingers around the warm metal. "I am already in heaven, Trey." I moved down the line, collecting the keys from Lucille, who surrendered them with a whimper, and from Ashley, who threw them at my feet, forcing me to bend down to pick them up, a petty final act of defiance that changed nothing. Jamal handed me his keys without a word. He placed them gently in my palm, his fingers brushing mine for a split second, a touch that used to mean safety and now meant nothing. "Goodbye, Keisha," he whispered. "Goodbye, Jamal." I watched them huddle together by the gate, a cluster of misery in designer clothes. Trey was shouting into his phone, trying to get a signal, trying to find a ride. Ashley was sitting on her suitcase, fanning herself with a magazine, complaining about the heat. Lucille was just staring at the house, staring at the windows she used to look out of, realizing she would never see that view again. And then a new sound cut through the air, the low purr of a high-performance engine. A sleek black Escalade turned onto the driveway, gliding past the huddled Vance family like a shark swimming past bait. The windows were tinted darker than midnight, reflecting their shocked faces as it rolled by. The car stopped right in front of the porch, and the driver's door opened. My assistant David stepped out, looking sharp in a fitted suit, despite the heat. He walked around to the back door and opened it, and there he was. Duke jumped out his coat, shining like polished obsidian, his tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. He looked healthy. He looked strong, and when he saw me, he let out a bark that sounded like pure joy. "Mom!" I turned to see Maya sprinting out the front door. Her headphones gone, her face lit up with a smile that could power a city Duke. She screamed, running down the steps. Duke saw her, and he didn't wait. He bounded forward, meeting her halfway, tackling her onto the grass, licking her face, her hands, her tears. "Oh, good boy," Maya sobbed, burying her face in his neck. "You came back! You came back!" I watched them, my throat tight with emotion. This was the victory. Not the house, not the money, not the revenge, this moment. Right here, seeing my daughter whole again, seeing the love that they had tried to destroy, restored stronger than before. I looked over at the gate at the Vance family watching this reunion. Ashley looked disgusted. Trey looked angry. But Jamal looked devastated. He was watching his daughter hug the dog he had allowed to be taken, and the realization of what he had lost finally hit him. He wasn't just losing a wife and a house. He was losing the only pure things in his life. The taxi finally arrived, a beat-up minivan that looked like it had survived a war. It rattled up the driveway, puffing blue smoke. "Get in." Lucille snapped at them, her voice regaining some of its shard-like quality. "Get in before we catch something." They loaded their bags into the trunk, squeezing into the cramped back seat. Ashley sandwiched between Trey and Lucille, complaining about the smell of stale cigarettes. As the taxi pulled away, Jamal looked back one last time through the dirty rear window. Our eyes met across the distance, and I saw the regret. I saw the apology. He would never get to speak. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just watched until the van disappeared around the bend, leaving nothing but dust and silence in its wake. It was over. I walked back up the steps to the porch and stood by the railing, looking out at my domain. Maya and Duke were playing on the lawn, chasing each other in circles, their laughter ringing clear and sweet in the afternoon air. I should have felt sad. I should have felt the weight of a 10-year marriage ending, the grief of a family broken apart. But as I stood there breathing in the air that no longer smelled of judgment, I realized I didn't feel heavy. I felt light. I felt like I could fly. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and dialed a number. I had looked up the night before. "Hello." A professional voice answered. "Reynolds Luxury Real Estate." "How can I help you?" "Hi, this is Keisha Vance," I said, turning my back on the view. "I have a property I want to list immediately, the Lake House Estate on Conversational Drive." "Oh, the Vance Estate?" the agent asked, sounding surprised. "That is a premier property. Are you looking to test the market?" "No," I said, walking back into the house, my heels clicking on the floor that was finally mine. "I am looking to liquidate. I want it sold fast. Price it to move. I want it gone by the end of the month." Is there a problem with the property?" the agent asked, hesitating. "No structural problems," I said, looking at the portrait of Lucille still face down on the mantel. "Just a bad history. I do not like the smell. The smell, ma'am." "Yes," I said, stepping out onto the back deck one last time, watching the sun dip toward the water. "The smell of betrayal. It is impossible to get out of the curtains. Sell it all furnished. I do not want a single teaspoon left behind." I hung up and took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of pine and water and freedom. They thought they could break me. They thought I was a sheep. They could shear for their comfort, just another asset to be managed and drained. They looked at my kindness and saw weakness. They looked at my silence and saw submission. They forgot that a sheepdog looks a lot like a wolf until it is time to fight. I walked down the steps onto the grass, joining my daughter and my dog. "Don't ever let anyone tell you who you are, Maya," I said, pulling her into a hug watching Duke chase a butterfly. "Don't ever let them make you small." She looked up at me, her eyes shining like her father's used to before the world broke him. "I won't, Mom," she said. "I am a Vance." "No, baby," I said, kissing her forehead. "You are a warrior. There is a difference." I looked at the gate one last time, making sure it was closed, making sure they were gone. "Don't ever touch my kid, and don't ever touch my dog, because next time I won't just take the house, I will take the whole world." Keisha's journey serves as a powerful reminder that silence should never be mistaken for submission. In a world that often demands we be loud to be heard, she proved that the most lethal moves are made in quiet calculation. The Vance family's downfall wasn't just a result of financial ruin, it was the inevitable collapse of entitlement when finally faced with genuine integrity and grit. We learned that you cannot negotiate your worth with people who profit from your devaluation, nor can you save those who are determined to drag you down with them. Standing up for yourself isn't always about screaming. Sometimes it's about recognizing when the table you're sitting at no longer serves you and having the courage to buy the building instead. Financial independence is more than a luxury. It is a shield against disrespect and a sword against betrayal. Never let anyone make you feel small in a life you built with your own hands, and never apologize for outgrowing spaces that were too small for your spirit. If Keisha's ultimate victory gave you the courage to set your own boundaries today, smash that like button and subscribe to join our community of warriors who know their true worth.